The view from San Francisco's waterfront and the future of the city's affordable housing could both change under a measure on next week's ballot. Voters will decide whether to approve a large, luxurious condo complex along the Embarcadero. That ballot item, Proposition C, is turning into a referendum on gentrification, big money politics, and San Francisco's complex process of planning for its own future. KQED's Musiker has the story.
The 8 Washington project won final approval from the city last year after 7 years of hearings. The developer was pulling permits for construction, but that stopped when opponents announced a measure to kill the project. That's Proposition C on San Francisco's Tuesday ballot. It asks voters if they want to grant the project a height exemption, as the Planning Commission did, letting it rise 50 feet higher than local zoning allows.
8 Washington would be the first brick in a new wall on the waterfront.
John Gollinger is a political and neighborhood activist running the anti-condo campaign. Its slogan is "No Wall on the Waterfront," to remind people of the ugly old Embarcadero Freeway torn down after the Loma Prieta earthquake.
Now some people want to change the waterfront again. They want to build tall buildings, starting with 8 Washington, increase the height limits, and reconstruct, in effect, that barrier that was here for so long, dividing the city from the bay.
The residents of a future 8 Washington, if there ever are any, would live on some of the Bay Area's most valuable real estate, just north of the Ferry Building. They'd enjoy killer views for a high price. The 134 condos would sell for $2 million and up. Opponents have also complained about that exclusivity.
There's no on-site affordable housing, so we're creating a whole, small little enclave and neighborhood.
Market rate project. That's a larger payment than required, but not enough for Avalos.
It could be higher, and it should be higher. And actually, it should be on-site housing. So we're not just building little enclaves of very wealthy people, completely excluded from the rest of San Francisco.
I voted for the 8 Washington project 3 times, and I would vote for it again. It's an excellent project.
Scott Wiener is one of the 8 supervisors who approved 8 Washington. He notes that the Planning Commission negotiated a good deal for the city, including that $11 million for affordable housing, enough to subsidize 55 units, like those soon to be built for LGBT seniors in Wiener's district.
And the only way that we were able to build is because we were able to tap into some of this funding paid by market rate projects.
The developer is fighting to put 8 Washington back on track, qualifying Proposition B for the ballot. A yes vote would lock in place the exact project the supervisors approved last year. B's supporters include Tim Colin, who runs the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, a smart growth group.
At its tallest point, this is a very modestly sized project.
Colin's a little out of breath because we're walking around the site in the shadow of 2 older condos and the towering Embarcadero Center.
And it fits in this neighborhood of giants here, of all the tallest buildings on the city skyline.
The address is now a port-owned parking lot and a tennis club surrounded by a 12-foot cyclone fence.
No one comes here. There's trash and leaves strewn everywhere. Here's a shopping cart. The project would change that, would activate it for pedestrians and bicyclists and people to actually use the waterfront.
So what drives the intense opposition? Corey Cook teaches political science at the University of San Francisco. He thinks people jittery about San Francisco's housing affordability crisis may just not feel like voting for condos for millionaires.
And so 8 Washington has become emblematic of the Google buses and the spread of the .com population into San Francisco, the rising housing prices, the rising rents, the gentrification pressures in the Mission District and in other neighborhoods.
That theme resonated with volunteers recently at the No Wall on the Waterfront offices in North Beach, where they're asking voters to say no to B and C. Karen Babbitt is an urban planner and was one of a half-dozen people working the phones.
Yeah, it's very hard to separate this project from the idea that we have a city. I think we've gotten carried away with building luxury homes. We seem to have more of those than we need and not nearly enough on the other end.
Volunteers ring that bell we hear when a caller gets a promise of a no vote. The other hallmark of this fight, big money on both sides. Pacific Waterfront Partners has poured more than $1 million into the Yes on B campaign, hoping for hundreds of millions in profits from the project. And opponents have tapped deep pockets as well. One wealthy couple has put more than $250,000 into the No on B and C campaign. They live in a neighboring condo and fear they'll lose their views. And even with all that money and the ads it buys, barely 20% of registered voters are likely to turn out for this off-year election. I'm Musiker, KQED News.